afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to be here with these remarkable individuals. I am Maribel Pérez Wadsworth. I am the CEO of the Knight Foundation. Spent 3 decades as a journalist, so I'm particularly honored to be on the stage on World Press Freedom Day. So let me start by introducing our panelists. Immediately to my left is Ambassador Roger Carstens. He is the inaugural John McCain Freedom for Political Prisoners Distinguished Senior Fellow. And just prior to taking this role, of course, he served as the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs at the State Department. He has played, as I'm sure most of you know, a central role in the safe release of dozens, I think we can safely say, of wrongfully detained Americans. So welcome, Ambassador. Immediately to his left is Vladimir Kara-Murza. He is a Russian politician, writer, historian. There are many, many other titles that we can use beyond that. He is also a Washington Post contributor, for which last year he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. We'll come back to that momentarily. Alsu Kurmasheva, a journalist with Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, also a staunch press freedom advocate. She is a dual Russian and American citizen. As all of you know, last summer, both Vladimir and Alsu were released in a historic prisoner swap that was in part, he will say, with a team architected by Ambassador Carstens. So I think we will start there. And I would love, Vladimir and Alsu, for you to set the stage a little bit. Give us a little bit of the detention, the circumstances around your detentions, and leading up to that August 1st date.
Thank you very much. This day last year, Vladimir and I were in a Russian prison, very far away from each other, thousands of kilometers, probably under different circumstances and conditions. I'm not going to talk today how hard it was physically. The guards were trying to deprive us of dignity, isolate us from the free world. They succeeded to some extent. The feelings were taking over. It was hard. But we always believed that we will be back. We always knew that somebody like Ambassador Carstens will come and take us home. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. My detention was a brutal violation of press freedom, of human rights. I've been a journalist for more than 20 years, working for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, doing regional journalism. The most impactful journalism as we connected to our audiences in our native languages, and the most dangerous journalism for authoritarian regimes, because they don't care that much what we talk about them here, but they really do care when we reach the audiences who speak their language and we understand what their problems are, and we are able to articulate and to focus on their lives. RFE is a unique place where journalists speak more than 20 languages. And the audiences, we've never had a problem of trust. You know, media has problem of trust all over the world. We never had that problem. Because when something happens in their town or city, the audiences turn to us, because this is the local, the federal media. They don't cover what's happening. They learn it from us, and despite of all hard conditions, I'm so happy that I'm here. And the advocacy by the McCain Institute really made difference. Every time my name was mentioned at a forum like this or in media, I was thrown to a cell with even worse conditions. Before I realized why the reason of that, Of course, I was horrified. I wouldn't understand why that was happening. But later on, when I started seeing the bigger picture of it, I actually was happy when my bad conditions would become even worse, because I knew there was a strategy here in the free world to bring me home, to reunite me with my family.
Incredible. Vladimir, what about you?
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the organizers and hosts of the Sedona Forum, the McCain Institute, and so many good friends that I see in this room. And believe me, it's not just a polite turn of phrase when I say how happy, how privileged, and how grateful I feel to be able to be back here. I used to be a regular, but I had missed 3 of these conferences for reasons beyond my own control. And I have to say I was less optimistic than Alsu. I didn't think I'd ever be, not just at this forum, but anywhere else. And it was really a miracle that happened on the 1st of August last year. I mean, it's both in a literal sense, I'm a Christian, but also I mean this in the sense that it was, in many ways, a human-made miracle, made possible by so many good people in democratic nations, so many of whom are in this room now, who never stopped advocating, speaking, shouting about all of those who are locked up in Vladimir Putin's Russia for the only quote-unquote crime that they dared to speak out against his dictatorship, his repression, and of course his criminal war of aggression in Ukraine. That is now the biggest single reason for political imprisonment in Russia. It's said, you mentioned Maribel at the beginning, that I'm also a historian by my background and my education, and it is sometimes said that every historian subconsciously wants to personally experience the area of his or her study. Well, my area of study was the Soviet dissident movement, so I guess be careful what you wish for if that is true. And it was astonishing to me in terms of just everything, really, the day-to-day reality in the Russian Gulag, and still is a Gulag in so many ways. Just how nothing really has changed since the Soviet times. I had the honor of knowing many of these legendary, heroic people personally, people like Vladimir Bukovsky and Sergei Kovalyov, and Natan Sharansky, who would regularly write to me in prison and respond to him, and so many others. And of course, I'd read their books many times before, but when I was rereading them in prison, it was a very different experience, right? It was an experience not only of reading a book, but actually of living inside it. And it was astonishing as to how everything, down to the last details, has remained the same. You know, the way prison guards speak to you, the way your cell is organized, the way the prison day is structured, everything is exactly the same. The only thing that was different in my case was the sentence, 25 years. That sentences like this, political prisoners in Russia have not seen since the death of Stalin in 1953. So Natan Sharansky actually had one of the longest sentences for the post-Stalin era dissidents in the Soviet Union. His sentence was 13 years. He didn't serve it out, he was also exchanged. In 1986, famous walk across the bridge from East to West Berlin. But that was a sentence he received. Mine was 25, which I guess in one way, of course, I took as a medal, as a recognition, I guess, that what I did really did make Mr. Putin unhappy. But I remember when I was being transported by prison transport from Moscow to Siberia, this was in September of 2023, after the sentence and after the appeal had passed. And by the way, even just to illustrate how much everything really is the same, at the end of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The First Circle, where, do you remember when the prisoners were suddenly sort of told that they will be put on the prisoner transport from Moscow to Kazakhstan in their case, because of course Solzhenitsyn writes about his own experience. His sort of alter ego, Nerzhin, asks others, how are we going to go there? What's the route? And another prisoner says, we're going to go through the Kuibyshev transit prison. Kuibyshev is a present-day Samara. That was a Soviet-era name. This was December of 1949 that he describes. I took exactly the same route in September of 2023. Nothing has changed. And so when I was in that transit, in the Samara transit prison, in the Kuibyshev transit prison, when we were being taken from prison back to the paddy wagon to be driven to the Stolypin train to be taken further east, normally the convoy, the prison convoy, doesn't allow prisoners to speak to each other, certainly, you know, politicals who are considered the most dangerous. We're always locked up in separate sort of little cells that are different from where everybody else sits. But that particular convoy was sort of they didn't care much. And they didn't care when people started speaking, including through the walls with each other, through the walls of the paddy wagon. And people, of course, the first thing they do, they start introducing themselves. And the way it's done in prison, you say your name, where you're from, and you say your sentence. So there was Ivanov, Irkutsk, 7 years. There was, Petrov, Novosibirsk, 9 years, and so on. And then it came to my turn, and what else could I say? I said, Kara-Murza, Moscow, 25 years. And then there was a dead silence in the paddy wagon. And then one guy in the next compartment sort of looked out and looked at me and said, did you eat people? This was the only thing he could think of. And I said, no, I made 5 speeches. Because that was my criminal indictment and my sentence. 5 speeches. 2 public speeches against the war in Ukraine. One of them here in Arizona, and this state is forever going to hold a special place in my heart. That was my first criminal indictment. March 15th, 2022, when I spoke at the Arizona legislature in Phoenix. That was my first crime. Then there was another testimony against the war in Ukraine at a Helsinki Commission hearing at the US Congress, also March 22. And then there was one speech against the unlawful, illegal, illegitimate way that Putin contravened the presidential term limits in our constitution to stay in power indefinitely. That speech I made in Lisbon at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly meeting, that was another one. And then 2 others were against political repression and political assassinations in Putin's Russia. One in Oslo, Norway, one in Moscow, the annual conference on political prisoners that we would always hold. So those were my 5 crimes. And the day I received my sentence at the Moscow City Court, when I was being escorted down by the police convoy, and there's this sort of special basement area where there are cells where they hold the inmates, the head of the police convoy turned around, because I was walking with handcuffs like this down the stairs, police all around, and the commanding officer looked at me and he said, did you really just get 25 years for 5 speeches? I said, yeah, I guess I did. He thought a little bit and he said, I hope they were good. I said, well, that is not for me to judge. But all jokes aside, the situation in Russia today is the worst it has been. Not only since the end of the Soviet time, but since the death of Stalin. We have more political prisoners in Russia today, even according to the officially, publicly known numbers, which are a great underestimate. I can tell you, having been inside the system, there are so many people who are not on anybody's radars, who are not on anybody's lists, whose names are not being discussed at parliamentary hearings and press briefings and so on. But even the number that we know is more than 3,000 people. This is an estimate from the Memorial Human Rights Center, Russia's most respected human rights organization, the co-recipient of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize. They just came out with their report a couple of weeks ago. More than 3,000 people in Russia today are imprisoned on politically motivated ground. Just to put things in context, in the mid-1980s, in the waning years of the USSR being 15 countries put together, not just Russia, the number was 700 political prisoners. Wow. And this is just to put things in context. Russia and Belarus alone are more than 5,000 people. And our exchange, the exchange that freed Alsu, myself, and 14 others from the modern-day Russian Gulag, as I said, it was a miracle, and it's been described in the media many times as historic because it was the largest East-West prisoner exchange since the time of the Cold War. But this largest prisoner exchange released 16 people on our side and 8 on the other, so 24 in total. So it's clear that nobody's ever going to be able to exchange 3,000 people. Even if there had been will for this, we see there is none under the current US administration, 0. But even if there had been, it would be physically impossible. And so I just want to flag for everybody who's present here today and for everybody who's watching us on live stream, I want to flag a public campaign that has been launched a few months ago, initially by a Ukrainian and a Russian human rights organization together, which is rare enough these days, unfortunately. The Center for Civil Liberties in Ukraine and Memorial, which I already mentioned, they're actually the 2 co-recipients of the 2022 Nobel Peace Prize, and the third was Ales Belyatsky, political prisoner from Belarus. The campaign is called People First, and it's now being co-sponsored and supported and backed by dozens of international human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, including the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, including Reporters Without Borders, today being the International Press Freedom Day, and many, many others. And the goal of this campaign is very simple: to make sure that whenever a deal is signed to suspend, to freeze the active phase of the war in Ukraine, and it looks like something will be signed in the near future, that deal includes a provision to release all the captives of this war who are being held to this day, meaning POWs, of course, prisoners of war, but that sort of goes without saying because that's explicitly provided for in the Third Geneva Convention, but meaning also tens of thousands of Ukrainian civilians who are being unlawfully held by Putin's Russia, meaning tens of thousands of Ukrainian children. Senator Klobuchar spoke about it this morning, who have been abducted by Russian forces and brought either to Russian territory or to Russian-occupied territory. All these children have to be repatriated and returned home. And meaning Russian political prisoners who are jailed for the only reason that they had the courage and the conscience to speak out against this criminal war. These people have to be part of any deal. We hear a lot about the deal in the last few weeks, but all we hear about is territories and sanctions and frozen assets and rare earth minerals and whatever else. Nobody actually seems to be talking about people.
The human
and
price.
they are the biggest, the human price, and they're the biggest victims of this war. So all captives, Ukrainian and Russian alike, have to be released. This is a complete imperative, and I just wanted to flag that campaign. And we discussed that last Monday at a meeting of the advisory board. Ambassador Carstens was there, of the McCain Institute Freedom for Political Prisoners Initiative, which I have the honor to chair. We were discussing the possibility that the McCain Institute would publicly back this initiative, and I hope it happens. And I hope that everyone here, in your different ways and in the different possibilities that you can find, that you will support this campaign, because time is running short. So many of these political prisoners, so many of these Ukrainian captives are not going to be able to survive until the end of the Putin regime, when everybody obviously will be released, but we don't know when that's going to happen.
That's right.
And for so many of these people, it's literally a question of life or death. We need to release them now.
That's right. And we heard, yes. We heard Senator Klobuchar this morning also raise the plight, especially of the children and the orphans, and making sure that they were centered as part of any deal. Ambassador Carstens, take us to this incredibly complex, multi-nation deal. How does one get there exactly?
Thank you. First, I wouldn't mind saying thank you to Maribel for leading this panel. Thanks to my two co-panelists up here. It was wonderful to see. In fact, I feel like you stole my line, Senator Klobuchar, where you saw her drinking a margarita. Actually, I'm sorry, Yevgenia. I'm not sure the story, but
it was me. Yeah, thanks again thanks for the second time putting on the spot with the margarita.
It was his third margarita too. I saw it.
I'm going to drink only Coke starting from now.
I had 4 margaritas and tripped.
I've had a 2.5-year detox, so be gentle.
Well, my moment was last night, sitting talking to 2 people to my left and right, and then I looked up and I saw you and your wonderful bride, who worked so hard to bring you home, having dinner. And it just melted my heart to see you had your hand on his shoulder, and you tilted your head back and you were laughing. And I'm like, just last year, you know, that wasn't happening. I remember that we met at the McCain Ranch, and we were out there talking and plotting and scheming about what we're going to do next. And it's good to see Pavel here. If you recall the White House Correspondents' Dinner, you came up to me and I said, Pavel, I'm not allowed to talk. I said loudly so everyone could hear. I'm not allowed to talk to you. Meet me over in the corner. Get a drink. So he came over and we started to plot and scheme how we're going to get Alsu out. But this was, and also let me say thanks to the McCain Institute, of course, for convening us, and Arizona State University as well. Pedro for leading the Freedom for Political Prisoners Initiative. And of course, I always want to give a shout out to Evelyn Farkas, my longtime friend from about 20 years ago, as well as Ambassador McCain and Jack McCain for all the things they're doing to bring all this together. But in a nutshell, you can't surge trust. We used to say that in Special Forces. And I can remember President Biden making a lot of phone calls at critical moments, Jake Sullivan working with his counterpart Blitner, and a lot of diplomacy going left and right. But if we were to rewind it back a little bit, there was a time when we traded Brittany Griner for the Merchant of Death, Victor Boot. And when that trade was complete, we all went back and thought, okay, now we still have Paul Whelan to get out. And we'd whiteboard it and said, how are we going to do this? Because the Russians don't want anyone on our list, because we test drove our prisoner list with the Russians. They weren't interested in any of them, the Russians that we were holding in the United States. And then we went back and thought of something we were going to do in Venezuela back in the olden days. To break Venezuela loose, there was a time when we thought about trying to get prisoners from Iran, Russia, and put it into a big swirl to see if we could break it loose. And that's when we started to think about Russia. If we could perhaps see which political prisoners, or rather, which Russian spies, rather, were being held by countries around the world, maybe we could come up with a list that would be attractive enough. And as it became clear that the Russians wanted this assassin by the name of Krasikov, we started to think, what is it going to take the Germans, what is it going to take us to do to get the Germans to be willing to put Krasikov in play? Because obviously when you are talking about sending an assassin back to Russia and in the conduct of a swap, there's a moral hazard question. And so as we started to whiteboard this and started to find prisoners around the world, we finally came up with a name. And I got to give credit to Jamie Rubin. Jamie and I were plotting and scheming a little bit. And Jamie said, let's call this enlarging the problem. And I said, what's that about? And he goes, President Eisenhower said that in 1958. But he goes, Roger, here's your problem. You're going to have to market this at the White House, and you need a catchy name. So enlarging the problem, it has, I don't know, there's something there. And so we started to propagate enlarging the problem. If we could pull off a deal to where we were taking Russian prisoners, or I keep saying prisoners, Russian spies that were being held in places like Slovenia, Poland, Norway, working with the Germans, working with the Turks, maybe we could finally get something that would balance everyone's concerns out. And sure enough, through a what I would say is a whole of government effort that involved people in the intelligence community, I would say definitely people in the National Security Council, Jake Sullivan and his team, the president making personal phone calls, we were able to finally pull this together and make it happen. On the you can't surge trust side of the House, I do have to tell you that it was a good thing to have President Biden be able to pick up the phone and call a world leader that has known President Biden for quite some time, that trusted him, and was willing to say, this is going to be a tough decision to make, but I'm willing to go ahead and address it because I know you and I know you need help. So I know that probably gave you a little more than you wanted, but again, can't surge trust. Relationships matter in this business, and whole of government effort.
Thank you. I want to come back to, clearly we've been talking about this all day, the new administration in the US has been marked by dramatic and rapid change to the world, to our domestic governance, some would say to our relationship with democratic norms. Also, I want to come to you because some of these changes are very directly affecting you and RFE and Radio Liberty with the decision to cut off funding. Now, this has been in a year of tumultuous weeks, a particularly tumultuous one for your organizations, given that one judge said that we had to reinstate the funding, another judge has stayed that order, and so it goes, who knows, somebody will keep us honest if that changes while we're sitting here, which is certainly possible. So tell us what is going on in your organization right now. How are people feeling? What is the outlook?
Thank you, by the way. I hear this story for the first time, Ambassador Carstens. I was always curious what was behind our swap, but this is great. Thank you. So when the crisis, the funding crisis started, I had two thoughts on my mind. Two things. Are we abandoning our audiences? It's more than, it's almost 50 million people all around the world weekly. And we are the only source of independent and balanced information. The second, as I got released and took some time to improve my health, I jumped into press freedom advocacy. RFE has 4 journalists in prison right now. One of them is Nika Novak in Russia, in Siberia. I'm worried about her a lot. Recently, we lost her for 10 days, almost 2 weeks. We just lost her. She was taken out from one detention center and she disappeared. Knowing in what horrific conditions in transit she might be, I started contacting all press freedom organizations, so we kept her name in spotlight. She reappeared in another detention center in Siberia 2 weeks after. I was relieved a little bit. We have Farid Mirhalizadeh in Azerbaijan. We have Ihar Losik in Belarus. We have Vlad Yosipenko in Russian-occupied Crimea. I'm in touch with their families. I'm working with lawyers to potentially release them because journalism is not crime and they need to be free. And the second thought was, how am I gonna communicate to their families and themselves, and what am I gonna write in the letters to them? Look, this is what we are doing. We don't have money anymore to support you. Goodbye? No, I cannot do that. So this keeps me awake every morning. As every morning I wake up with a gratitude for the free world to bring me home, to reunite me with my family. And the second thought is, what else can I do to release those imprisoned journalists? And I'm so happy to have all the contacts of press freedom organizations that RFE had contacted to bring me back. I believe we can continue working, and I believe we can continue searching for solutions. RFE is marking the 75th anniversary this year. It's been 30 years since the Czech President Václav Havel invited us to RFE to relocate from Munich. And it's a big year. Instead of celebrating, we are dealing with this major financial crisis. I just want to mention something here, something that works, something that I believe in. RFE launched essay competition among high schoolers in the Czech Republic. High schoolers in the Czech Republic have been privileged to live and grow up in a free world, thanks to Václav Havel, thanks to democracy, and thanks to free media. They have no idea what repression is, what repression of freedom press is. Yet, when we were starting that competition, we had no idea. I had skeptical views of my colleagues. We will get zero essay, we won't get anything. We got tons of essays, and beautiful ones. And this is a quote from one of them. The free world is privileged, not only journalists and media. It's our choice, it's our responsibility to listen. Every time you hold a book that was banned at certain time of history, you feel this responsibility. It's like we got amazing essays. This is my belief in the younger generation in Russia, around the world. My heart grew bigger when I saw Anna Karina today accepting award on behalf of her brave mother. My daughters were advocating on my behalf, and that made difference. They stepped in, and they had to grow up faster than their friends, and that made the difference, and I'm so thankful. Even such a powerful, strong government as the United States has to be pushed by families, by human stories. And my story, Vladimir's story, is that story behind bigger, sometimes vague word as press freedom, the freedom of speech. And we are here so thankful. I really believe that the crisis with RFE can be resolved.
You actually make me think of Vlad, after you won the Pulitzer, you were interviewed for a podcast by Anne Applebaum. And on that, you were recalling a very significant life experience, the 3 days back in 1991 that ultimately brought down the Soviet Union, and you were describing your 10-year-old self experiencing that. And I just want to read a quote from what you said. You said, "However strong an authoritarian regime may seem, if enough people are willing to stand up to it, all that strength becomes meaningless." Sort of piggybacking on this idea of the people, ultimately, it's not only about the press. In your view, what does it take? What is the catalyst to reawaken in the people their sense of their own power?
The short answer is we never know. And as a historian, one thing I certainly know about the history of my country is that all the major political changes in Russia happened like this. 1905, 1917, 1991, both the Tsarist regime in the early 20th century and the Soviet regime in the late 20th century collapsed in 3 days, very literally, both times. And nobody saw it coming. There's a very good book that's out, I believe last year at the University of Berkeley, California, by a well-known Russian sociologist, sociology professor Alexei Yurchak. It's about the later years of the Soviet Union. And I love the title of that book. It was forever until it was no more. And that, as somebody who remembers that as a child, but who remembers that time, these words express it brilliantly, because that's exactly how it is. And it's like this every time. It's not just the end of the Soviet Union. It was the same before the Russian Revolution, the first, the good, the February Democratic Revolution in February of 1917. I'm not a big fan of Vladimir Lenin, I guess you could probably guess from my biography. And I do not often quote from his speeches, but there's one speech of his that I do enjoy quoting from, and that's a speech he made when he addressed the young Social Democrats of Switzerland in the city of Zurich, which he ended by saying that we old folks will not live to see the decisive battles of this coming revolution. That speech was made on January 22nd, 1917. The revolution began in 6 weeks. This is Russia. Nobody can predict it even a week before. What we can do is be prepared. And to me, this is the most important task for any responsible opposition member today, because the sort of the downside, the flip side of the coin in change happening so precipitously, so unexpectedly, so swiftly, is that nobody was really ready for it. And to me, the mistakes that were made by the short-lived democratic government in Russia in the 1990s was, we're not necessarily committed because of malice or because of bad intent or because of anything else. They were just not prepared for it. Nobody thought, because it was forever until it was no more.
Until it wasn't.
And I believe it's really important for us as the democratic movement, as the anti-Putin resistance in Russia today, to have a detailed plan, a strategy, a roadmap, if you will, for the day after Putin. Because we have no right to mess up and to miss the opportunity in the same way that our parents' generation did back in the 1990s.
Ambassador, I want to bring you back into this before I turn it to audience questions, so I want to make sure that you all are thinking about the questions you want to ask. Because it's World Press Freedom Day and you are who you are, and this is an important topic, I want to ask you about Austin Tice. For the very few number of you who may not know, Austin was a freelance correspondent in Syria, covering the civil war for many news organizations in the US, including the Washington Post. He was abducted in August of 2012, and we have not seen him since. So just yesterday, I believe, his mother, Deborah, was at the National Press Club in DC, and in an interview, she said that she had very recently reviewed documents the Trump administration had given her access to, and she believes that the US government knew, at least until Assad's ouster, where Austin was being held. What can you tell us about the continued commitment of the US government to finding Austin, and how do you feel about the likelihood that we're going to get him back?
I think I'll talk fast because I know the clock's running down. Before I do, we're talking about enlarging the problem, the thing that brought you home. It is World Press Freedom Day. And I would be remiss if I let you all think that just the US government and other governments played a role. There are actually brave reporters from places like Der Spiegel, Bellingcat, the Wall Street Journal, and other places that played an outsized role in pulling this together. In fact, when I talked about enlarging the problem, I can remember a conversation in DC where a journalist from a foreign country actually was able to give me a list of the people he thought we might be able to throw on it. So anytime you get anyone home, it's a team sport. And I would say the media often plays a very strong role. In terms of Austin Tice, I saw the same reporting, and up until about, 103 days ago, I pretty much had access to everything that the US government had. And what I can tell you is we never knew where Austin was being held. And I would say we weren't entirely sure that he was even alive. I think the reading was that we believed with low confidence that he was still alive. I certainly believed that he was alive. And that's how I conducted my business, that we were pursuing someone who was waiting for us to bring him home. But I would say officially, we never really had any information that showed us that he was alive and where he was at. Having said that, we did see enough over the years to do a lot of painstaking work to say that there were probably 6+ facilities where he might have been held if he was indeed alive. And so when Damascus fell on the 8th, I arrived in Beirut on the 9th, and I tried to push into Syria Didn't get the chance for a few days, had to reposition to Amman, Jordan. Finally got into Damascus on the 20th. Sadly, I only had 2 hours on one of those 6 sites. Had an FBI team with me and a bunch of people looking around. We took photos, tried to find DNA evidence, tried to get anything that we possibly could. Saw enough documents to probably put 10 people to work for about 7 or 8 weeks, and that was on one site, and we only spent 2 hours there. So, have we done our jobs in terms of all the work that needs to be done to find Austin and return him to his mother, or to at least find out what happened? The answer is no. We need to get back into Damascus. We need to have FBI fly teams go through documents. We need to work with the government that's now in charge. But I think I can say, having worked in both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, I'm pretty convinced that the Trump administration is still going to push hard. They're going to do what they can to find Austin. Of course, it's going to require us to get a foothold into Damascus and work with the government to do so. But no one's going to drop the ball on that. If you're an American and you've been taken, whether you are alive or you may have passed or you did pass, the government has a responsibility to find you and return you home.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions with very brief answers. Any questions from the audience? Yes, can we get a mic right over here?
Help us to understand then the Austin Tice difference in information that Mrs. Tice is talking about. Also, while President Biden was still in office, there was a period where there was this perceived breakthrough about his status. Do you remember that, when that became an issue? So if she's now saying that there is information where the U.S. knows and you had access, how do you explain that? And is there a way for us to understand what that means? Because it does appear to be conflicting. And if you could just help us to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely read every single thing on Austin Tice pretty much ever produced, whether it was secret, top secret, compartmented. And I can tell you that we never had the major breakthrough that said he's at that location. I can tell you we fielded hundreds upon hundreds of, I would say, clues. And when you finally pull the string, you find out that it's false information, old information, someone trying to get some money and extort either the Tice family or the U.S. government. But when we found something, we would actually surge on it. And we essentially have a Tice team. It's located at the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell. There's an FBI guy that's always, I say guy, at times it was a girl, at times it was a guy, but there's always been one FBI agent, and that was his full-time job to pursue Tice leads. But there's also a team around it, both at the Department of State and at the CIA and the FBI, that focused on Austin Tice. And as much information as we tried to vacuum in, we could never really conclude he's being held here at this time. And I wish we did. And I'll tell you, the Syrians were tough. I probably went to the Syrian embassy in New York City like 5 or 6 times. There were times when I'd send my deputy. We've met with them overseas. You probably know I went to Damascus in 2020 and asked Ali Mamluk from about 5 feet away, could you please tell me where Austin is? And we never could find that kernel of information that said he's alive and here. And I wish we could have. It's definitely, when you leave a job like SPIHA, you leave feeling like you failed quite a few people. And Austin Tice is probably number 1 on my list of the things that I wish I somehow could have got done before I left. But I am grateful, again, the fight continues. The people that are still there will keep pursuing it. But in terms of that nugget of information, I think when we finally take a look at everything, we weren't able to find that critical piece. My hope is that now that Damascus has fallen and we have access to other documents, we'll find that piece of information, pull the string, and we'll recover Austin.
We're going to have to leave it right here. We are out of time. No surprise, the time has evaporated. Please join me in thanking our panelists.
Well done, sir. Beautiful.